Bonjour, mes amis.
Welcome. This is I Go Travel with Don Barnett. In this travelogue, we're going to look at some of the buildings and streets in downtown modern Quebec City. And we'll also take a look at a historic battle that was fundamental in the history of Canada. It's really a no-name battle, but it's a battle in which the British forces met the Americans who had come up to capture both Montreal and Quebec City. And this historic battle changed the course of history for Canada. So let's take a look at this, and I've made some other travelogues where we talk about some other things in Quebec City. So follow me. Walking around the streets of downtown Quebec City is a unique treat. It's a little bit of old Europe, but distinctly Quebec. Here are a few scenes as we walked around, gazing around like tourists do. We bought several t-shirts with these prints of Quebec humor on them. It tickled our funny bone. Quebec City was built as a fortress on a hill high above the St. Lawrence River. Because of that, you had better have good walking shoes to navigate the steep steps you'll encounter in some places. One way to avoid climbing and descending steep stairs is to take the Funiculaire, an efficient elevator-type cable car. It travels on almost a 45-degree angle, and I found it most worthwhile to pay the small fee to ride it. As one car goes up, it is helped by the weight of the car that is coming down. It opened way back in 1879 and has undergone several technical upgrades since then. Remember that Quebec was built as a military fortress situated on a high, steep hill, as well as at a point where the river was narrowest, and French cannons could effectively blaze away at any intruders like the British or anyone else. No intruding army ever penetrated the walls of the mighty, invincible fortress at Quebec. Look horizontally at the four times in which major battles and sieges occurred at Quebec. They were when, in black there, when Frontenac was governor of the colony, and on the decisive plains of Abraham, and almost the next day when General Levis attacked and drove the British back safely into the protective walls of the fortress. And also in 1776, when the Americans attempted to take the fortress when the British were inside. In each case, whoever remained inside was successful. Note the asterisk under the word Abraham. In the battle on the plains of Abraham, the British never did penetrate the walls of the fortress. The French lost largely because they decided to leave the safety of the fortress and confront the British out in the open on the plains of Abraham. Now, the final battle in 1776, on the right-hand side there, between the British and Americans, was absolutely key in setting the direction of history and explaining why Canada today is an independent nation as opposed to being another state of the United States. Let's look quickly and closer at this decisive battle that occurred right here at the Quebec fortress. It turned the corner and set the direction for Canada to eventually become a country. The Americans felt good. They just won their Revolutionary War with Britain. They had help from the French in the form of Lafayette, and George Washington was awfully nervous about the British presence to the north around the Great Lakes and the St. Lawrence. He felt that the Francophone population there would be supportive. They were having a honeymoon with France, and he decided to send his armies after the British once and for all, and they marched toward Montreal and Quebec. What he didn't realize was that the British had said, you know, we lost that Revolutionary War, and we should not have. And we're not going to get pushed around and beaten again. So the stage was set for a showdown that occurred at the fortress in Quebec City, and it changed the course of history for this area that was later on to be called Canada. This is what happened. Look at the diagram, and on the right, those are the generals who participated in this key time. On the top, the British leader was Sir Guy Carleton, and the Americans had 4 generals participating. 2 were good and 2 were disasters. The first one, Ethan Allen, and the third one, Arnold Worcester, were disasters. His top generals were Montgomery, and at the bottom, Benedict Arnold, who got a bad name afterwards because he turned against the Americans and switched sides over to the British, and the American textbooks have called him a wicked, untrustful dictator ever since. However, at this time, he was one of George Washington's best. So let's follow the numbers over in the middle part of the diagram on the sequence of events that were key here. Number 1 on the left side, in orange, Ethan Allen was sent by Washington to take Montreal and later Quebec. But he was not a very effective general, and Washington knew that. And the British quickly turned him away in Montreal, not even a fortified community as Quebec was. Then we go to number 2 in green. The good guy came, Montgomery. And he went north to Montreal. I put a circle there to show that he took Montreal. He made a reasonable peace with the Francophones in Montreal and said that they could live as they had been living, and he was going on to Quebec to clean the British out of there. Now, number 3 is the red line. That's Sir Guy Carleton. When Montgomery and the Americans came into Montreal, he had to flee and get out of town, and he went downstream to the big fortress at Quebec and holed up there. Now, number 4 is Montgomery continuing on to Quebec and laid siege to the fortress. Now, number 5 is Benedict Arnold, who came into Montreal on his way to reinforce Montgomery up in Quebec, because Montgomery discovered that he could not budge the British out of the fortress. And so Benedict Arnold went to Montreal and then continued on to Quebec, leaving a new person in charge of Montreal, a new American general, which is number 6 there, Arnold Worcester, and Worcester was a total disaster. He upset the Francophones in Montreal to no end. He was immediately into a fight with the church, and he eventually told the church, the Francophones, you're not even allowed to attend church on Sundays anymore. The Francophones in Montreal were not only suspicious of the Americans, they were absolutely turned off. If the American saviors were to treat them this way, what would happen to their culture? and their language and religion once the Americans took over. They tried to get an answer from Washington, and to their greater concern, they could receive no answer whatsoever, one way or the other, from Washington, whereas the British had indicated some possibility for negotiation. So things turned around. The Francophones started to turn against the Americans in their view. Now, looking back at the diagram, Benedict Arnold went on to help Montgomery attack Quebec. And in a snowstorm, Montgomery made a major attack upon the fortress. However, the British opened up with all firepower, and they found Montgomery's body buried in the snow the next morning. Benedict Arnold realized that he could not take Quebec, and the British were about to come out of the fortress after him. So in no uncertain terms, he scrambled out of Quebec, back upstream on the river to Montreal, and thought that he would have time to kind of regroup in Montreal, which was now a hostile city to him. However, next morning, or in the morning, bingo, the British are on the outskirts of Montreal, supported by a lot of Francophones. Benedict Arnold had to flee Montreal, and they scrambled out of Montreal, Benedict Arnold himself helping to push the last boat into the river off the bank. And the Americans started paddling southward and returned to the United States. And the British took over the whole area. At the time, the Francophones were really caught between a rock and a hard place. Who do you deal with? The British that you didn't like, or the Americans that you really weren't sure that you could trust? So they followed the old principle, that we should all follow maybe. When you have to deal with two devils, it is better to deal with the devil you know rather than the devil that you don't know. And the Francophones sided with the British, of all people, because they were not sure of what guarantees they would get from the Americans in terms of being able to maintain and practice their religion, language, and other parts of their culture. And it turned the corner in a new direction for what would later on become Canada. All right, so that's a little piece of Canadian history that is really not in a lot of textbooks, and I don't understand why, other than a lot of textbooks, even on Canada, are published by American publishing houses and written by American historians. So that might explain something. But anyway, we've got some more travelogues on Quebec City, so join us for those. Au revoir, mes amis.